happy about it. But then there are, I believe, unintended consequences, and we are extensively in talks with the US, bilaterally, also through the European Union, to make sure that those unintended consequences don't have the effect we are afraid they could have. And that is being done at the moment. I was myself last Tuesday with President Biden. I know the European Commission is working very hard on this. I'm not really pessimistic. I think we can get somewhere where it won't hurt. Why would they, after the Second World War, support us with the Marshall Plan now to put in legislation which is hurting the European Union? I'm not sure that everybody in the US was aware that there is not a free trade agreement with Europe, like they have with Mexico and with Canada. And of course, we would like to have preferential treatment. But this is, I think, not the big issue. The big issue, of course, is how to deal with the fact that there is not enough gas here on the continent. And as the Senator was saying, without all the LNG exports out of the US and the fact that we were able in 9 months to build a huge LNG terminal in the Netherlands, a second one, the Germans opening up now one every week it seems. I see Olaf Scholz opening up LNG terminals, it seems to be every weekend. It's crucial, in combination, of course, with lowering our dependency on fossil. And that can also be done, energy savings in the short term. For the longer term, this is not a solution. For the longer term, we have to get the climate change going, the energy transition, including green hydrogen, including nuclear. That will have to be part of the mix in the longer term, both the green hydrogen backbone as well as nuclear in the mix.
And it was a mistake to scale back nuclear in Europe, in your mind?
Again?
It was a mistake to scale back Europe.
Well, that is a decision. If I say that, I'm criticizing the German government. I'm not going to do that because it is a national. I promised her to be provocative, so and so she's now challenging me. But that is a national competence, Germany. But I would not be amazed if, in somewhat years in the future, I'm not sure about Germany, but many more countries will start to reinvest in nuclear. We will build 2 new nuclear reactors because we do feel it has to be part of our energy mix going forward. Of course, it takes years to build them. So for the shorter term, it is LNG, it is energy savings, and it is getting that energy transition going. And then I'm fairly confident that we can just scrape through and deleverage our dependence on Russia, which, of course, we were forced to do since this horrible aggression started against Ukraine.
Madam President, I'd love it if you could weigh in at this point and talk to me a bit about the obligations that you feel the West has to the global South. And I'm talking about the need for investment and also, in a sense, payback. To your mind, where does this leave you? Because technically, this isn't your fight.
Yeah, thank you. For me, I'm first looking at the sources of the crisis, and here we are talking about geopolitical and then climate change. But then geopolitical will always be there. So I think the lesson we are learning from that we have to diversify sources of energy. For a long time, I think Europe has been depending on wherever they were depending on, but then crisis happened, and now we have crisis in energy. So it's high time to look to Africa. It's high time that Africa could be another source of energy. We have everything. When we talk of green energy, Africa has got everything. Has got nickel, has got cobalt, has got copper. So it's high time Europe, America, and others come and manufacture. Extract from Africa, manufacture from Africa, and then leave some energy to Africa and take some to their other countries. But then I must say that for Africa, for us, we think we still need funding to get energy from gas. Of course, we accept green energy, but there has to be transition, proper transition.
And who should foot the bill for that, in your mind? Who should foot the bill for that? Should that be developed nations? Should it be the private sector?
Private sector, because it's trade and investment. So private sector should come to Africa, extract and produce energy. But again, fund for transition. Fund for transition, because the reality is Africa now needs a lot of energy, because the fourth industrial revolution is concentrating in Africa. A lot of investment, a lot of manufacturing is done over there. So there is a high demand of energy in Africa. So I think the world should look to Africa now. But again, in Africa we have learned our lessons as well. Whatever we have to concentrate in our power pools, regional power pools, East African power pools, Southern African power pools. We had that policy. We haven't done enough to create our power pools. So I think if we have the power pools, then there will no be problem of shortage of energy, because whoever has any crisis, the power pool could serve for the region. So that's the lesson I think we learned. But again, I think this is a global problem, and the solutions should be globally. Multilateralism in solving this problem.
Francesco?
Because, yeah, we have seen panicking around the world. The superpowers, big powers, they are all coming up with their own policies for getting more energy. Americans have got their own policies, Europe, Japan, India. They are coming with different policies, but in unilateralism. So we think this is a global problem. The globe should have a global effort to solve this problem. So that's what I can say.
Francesco, weigh in from the private sector point of view. You've heard from the policymakers. Does this, in your mind, influence your strategy going forward? Because Mr. Starmer, for example, is talking about an OPEC-like organization that would include all of the European nations as well as the United Kingdom, talking about a cohesive approach. Ms. Root is saying it's time to invest in more nuclear as well. What, to your mind, does this say to the private sector? Time to invest?
Yes. It's time to invest. Oh, sorry. I thought it's my question.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So I think if you look at the continuous changes in policy making around the world, you would really stop doing anything. I mean, this would be an on-off affair with very little done. So you have to look a little bit at the major trends. And the major trends are very simple and basic, and they've always been around. For something to make sense, it has to be in the money. It has to make economic sense. And I like very much what the Senator mentioned just said. You cannot substitute something if you don't have anything that substitutes it, that it's at least equal or better. So that's really the guiding principle for going long term. You have to make choices that are technologically robust in the economic sense. Second, clearly you want to avoid the climate risk disaster, so you have to have that light guiding you, because you cannot make long-term bets on this disaster that is in front of us. And thirdly, it has to do with security of supply, which was maybe a little bit in the limelight, in the back, of our mind a year ago. Now it's definitely in the front of the mind of many, many governments. So these three things really guide us. And if you look at what technology is doing in the light of these three parameters, there's lots of things that help and lots of investments that make sense. And when you see policies that don't get it, you try and articulate some kind of response and try to convince the policymakers and the regulators. You try again, and if it doesn't work, you go elsewhere. I mean, it's very simple. You cannot fight a government. You have to wait that the government changes, or you have to wait that their mind changes. But the world is large, and the opportunities for investments are everywhere. And, if I can say, we've been investing in the U.S. now more than almost 20 years, okay? So we've seen a lot of different administrations coming and going, and we've seen a trend that has been characterized by these three things. investments in renewables made sense because they were in the money, not because people were friendly with the environment. But you know that. You know, it's a total bipartisan issue. But is this investment making money? Yes, it is. So let's do it. We would have been crazy to force it without that guiding star. So I think that's really the point for a private sector that has a long term. Of course, there are short-term investments that don't require this kind of articulated thinking. But in our case, unfortunately, we are on very, very long term. So we have to go through this kind of principles to drive our strategy.
Does it concern you as an industry leader to hear the comments from Mr. Starmer, for example, that there should be no new oil and gas investment in the North Sea? Because we're talking about the transition, and every oil and gas energy CEO tells me regularly on CNBC that to do an orderly transition, you need to continue to invest in spare capacity and in fossil fuels.
Frankly, I think it is very, very difficult to answer that question. I tell you, and I know many of my colleagues in the oil and gas business, and I respect what they're doing because it's very, very difficult to transition. The transition is much faster than originally estimated, and it's going to accelerate. So the decisions in that field risk to be wrong or right very quickly, and that is a little bit contrary to this industry track record. This is an industry track record that goes in decades. But then here, we're talking about years. Think what happened to the gas business in Europe after the war. All of a sudden, we have a seismic change, and we discovered that we could use a lot less gas, not only because it's warm outside, but because we are all of a sudden understanding how much we were wasting of it.
Yeah.
So I think in that case, I would be kind of careful not to make bets that go too long in the future, because the future is coming fast.
Yeah. Ilham, what's the greatest danger in your mind as we move forward with the energy transition? Policymakers clearly got a lot of things wrong ahead of this horrific invasion of Ukraine, and we're seeing that all playing out now in real time, and over the last 12 months the same. To your mind, what does Brussels need to learn from this, from a policy perspective?
Well, a lot has been said. I represent the chemical industry here. It's the mother of all industries. For Brussels and Europe, we are the fourth largest industry in Europe, right? The oldest one, and the mother of all industries. Basically, without chemistry, there is no EV battery, there is no green hydrogen, there is no semiconductors. And it's one of the oldest one, 100 years of infrastructure. So in Europe, Europe is the most regulated region in the world. We have the Green Deal, we have the Fit for 55, which many corporations like ours have adopted. And there is a cost of decarbonization for the existing infrastructure. Let's not forget the old infrastructure. For a company like Solvay, it represents 20% of our annual revenues, right? It has a cost. We can do it. We're a large company. We believe in it. But there are SMEs, small and medium-sized enterprises. We need also, there are our customers, there are our suppliers. We need to embark. So the challenge, and then there is the green field, right? The green, investments like green hydrogen, right? Like EV batteries, the Airbus of batteries, semiconductors to get our sovereignty. Rare earths, we didn't talk about it. 90% of the magnet, they come from China these days, right? We are in a rare earth value chain, and we need to localize and onshore the rare earth. And all these investments have to be subsidized as well and supported. And the last but not the least is just transition, is how to upskill the 20 million Europeans who need to be upskilled to prepare them for the job of tomorrow. So there is one word, just one takeaway from my speech is competitiveness. Europe has a huge challenge and huge risk of deindustrialization. IRA is not the enemy, it's the best thing which could happen to Europe is IRA. Thank you. Because IRA, we should not get into the trap that Biden is incentivizing and Europe is over-regulating. And this is where we are today as an industry. So the question is not IRA or not. The question is, what does it take for Europe to have a competitive industrial infrastructure and policies? That's what we need. For the chemical industry, again, I need clean energy. I need it at cost, at scale, 365 days a year around my sites. To give you an example, we committed to exit coal by 2030. I joined the company 4 years ago. It took me 3 years to get permitting, both in Germany and France. It's insane. We were ready to pay the money. We had alliances, even subsidies. The money is not the problem. Cash is there. But the permitting and the bureaucracy is too heavy. So if there are two calls, as a European as well, cri du cœur, is we need an industrial policy with competitiveness at the heart of it. Let's talk about an energy union, carbon pricing. We already have it as a company globally, be it in China, in the US, or in Europe. And the second one is permitting. Get it done quicker.
Is that possible in your mind, Prime Minister?
Yes, and it is necessary. And so I really think...
Because I've spent a lot of time in Brussels, so...
You
could
yeah.
One could be forgiven for questioning
but always going back to The Hague. But there is this Inflation Reduction Act. I agree. It is also an opportunity because in Europe the discussion immediately focused on getting rid of state aid rules. That will be extremely unwise. We have to tune the state aid rules very specifically and targetedly, but not get rid of them. Secondly, we need a big new fund of money to subsidize our industries. There are lots of funds around. We have the European budget, we have the recovery funds, etc. So there is money about. What we do not have is enough competitiveness. We have a debt to GDP in some of the biggest economies over 100%. We have pension systems which are really outdated. And at this moment, taking out 10 to 15% of GDP in some of the biggest economies in Europe. And that is just, those are the things we have to transform. It's crucial. My country is now investing 35 billion in the energy transition because we can make that money available. Because we are only spending 5% of our GDP on pensions. But the most important thing, going back to the theme of this panel, is the energy transition, because there are large and big opportunities for companies, for innovation, if we do this in the right way. In my country, we have 10 million in employment, 10 million people employed. I predict that by 2030, 1 to 2 million will be employed in new industries, in innovative sectors, which will come out of this energy transition if we do it in the right way. And there we also have to work together at a European scale. I think that's crucial, but competitiveness, including bringing down our debt to GDP in many economies, is crucial. Otherwise, Europe will be the museum of the world, people coming here to look at the beautiful buildings and cities, but the real stuff will happen in Asia and the US. And I cannot accept that, because this is the best part of the world to live in, not only because of the musea, but also because of our industry base and our innovative industry.
Yeah.
And this is where I would think of some applause from the... Will be helpful. Thank you.
Let me respond basically. How the IRA came about was because of the Ukraine war. Let's be honest. We knew everyone has their desires. They want everything to be clean and green. We all do. But also the real life sets in, and the realization that you've got to have dispatchable 24/7 in a country, in all of our countries, 24/7 power dispatchable. Okay? And up until not long ago, we basically had only coal and nuclear. Then gas came on. And we did, it was controversial, but we did fracking. Fracking unleashed an ocean of energy for the United States. We were basically a net importer of energy we needed. We reversed our terminals to be exporters. We've got 6 terminals working now, export LNGs. We got 4 more that will come online very quickly. And then we have 10 in a hopper. Maybe even half of those come. So that's where we're going to get to the 2030. So we become a net export. We played to our strengths. But that it didn't hit really a nerve until we saw what Putin did to Ukraine. That's what got me going. And when we were told, in all these high-end meetings that we have, secretive meetings in the SCIF we call it, that if 2 things are going to happen in 2022. Either Russia would move on Ukraine, or China would move on Taiwan. Those were the 2 things, and they gave us the scenarios. They broke it down from a military standpoint. We were told that basically Ukraine, it's not going to, if it does happen, it won't be long. maybe a week or two. It's going to be so like Crimea. So we had all these set aside. We were told that also inflation wasn't going to be, it's transitory. I didn't think that was true, and I told him I disagreed with him, and I didn't think that Ukraine would roll over. God, they didn't. Thank God for Zelensky and Ukrainian people. When all that happened, then Putin weaponized energy. Then you all
To be fair, Senator, he had been weaponizing energy for quite some time.
I know he has. I know he has, but it's been more effective now. And it was effective because he was able to really put a hurting on all of our allies. Yeah. And here we are, you know, with all these resources and haven't developed them. That's why we did what we did. And I know right now people are saying, well, the markets, this is not protectionism. This is basically ingenuity at its best. What we're saying is, and we paid for that. This is not debt financing. This was paid for by 15% corporate tax. A lot of corporations were not paying a 15% fair share tax. We put that in. I thought that was the fairest thing to do. And we paid for it. Also, we paid over $300 billion of our debt we paid down. First time in 30 years. Paid down debt, produced more energy, put more product in the market. That's why it's called inflation reduction. If you put more product in the market, you should have lower prices.
Senator?
I feel very bad about the prices they had to pay. I mean, when on the spot market, you were paying some of the highest prices of gas and our LNG. That's what we've got to change. We've got to give you a stable long-term pricing at a much better price, and we can do that.
Because so many people in Europe have accused the United States of price gouging when it comes to gas.
The market is what the market is. Price, you know, bottom line, we had a lot of energy. The market needed it. The world was demanding it. And that's where the market went. It's like the oil market.
So they should be able to charge whatever they feel is...
Well, they're basically in a market system unless you want to put caps on everything. And you start putting caps on things, you won't have the product you need when you need it. That's the problem. So what we're talking about now, if we put more product out there, we have more LNG, there'll be more competition. You're going to be able to have, you know, you're down to about $20 now in MCF. We're at about basically $6. We're used to paying $3.50 at MCF. You paid $60, $80 equivalent to an MCF. It was ridiculous. My heart hurt for you all. But
Senator,
the bottom line is we can get that
Senator,
down. We've
I
got
have a question for you.
We feel our pain.
You're widely considered,
right?
Senator, you're widely considered as a man that actually Republicans can work with when it comes to energy.
Hopefully everybody can.
Well, does that mean that you're going to run in 2024?
My main thing is I don't look at Democrats and Republicans. I don't look at the party. Are you on the right or the left? I'm an American party. I want my country to be as strong as it can to help all of our allies that gave us...
But what about your party? Are you going to run in 2024?
I have no idea what I'm going to do in 2024. I really don't. I've been at this for quite some time. But I've never been able to be pigeonholed. I've never been afraid of losing. That's the smallest price I can pay to do what I think is right.
Mr. Starmer, bring you in on this. First of all, are you surprised that your prime minister didn't show up to Davos?
Yes, I think our Prime Minister should have showed up at Davos. I absolutely do. And one of the things that's been, impressed on me since I've been here is the absence of the United Kingdom. And that's why it's really important that I'm here and that our Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves is here as a statement of intent that should there be a change of government, and I hope there will be, the United Kingdom will play its part on the global stage in a way I think it probably hasn't in recent years. And so that's my opportunity to say why we're here. I do think the Prime Minister should be here, having these discussions, having the meetings that I've been having. I want to say just a little bit about the IRA, because I think it's very easy to sort of retreat and to see challenge. I actually think it should be a catalyst for all of us to say, well, come on, there is a challenge in relation to the climate crisis. That's been there for a very long time. But the Ukraine conflict has brought that into sharp focus. And we need to stop seeing it as just a challenge. Say, well, it's actually the single biggest opportunity we've been given for a very long time to transition, to take the jobs and opportunities of the future. I do think that that requires a different view of the state, and this is something that will happen if we have a Labour government in the United Kingdom, because what we want is an active state that is not saying, well, look, we're going to suck it all up to the centre, not saying we're going to leave it to the private sector, but a state that partners with the private sector to take these opportunities. And, you know, one of the things I'd say about renewables is, look, we do need to drive down the price. They are, you know, cheaper. In the UK, renewables are 9 times cheaper than oil and gas at the moment. It's economic sense to press forward here, to innovate and make sure that, you know, an active state knocks out the barriers. There's no end of businesses that saying to me, we could go faster here on the renewables, but there's bureaucracy, there's planning, there's all the things that get in the way. And I think an active state says, right, we partner with that, we knock them out of the way, and we drive forward, because the prize here is huge in terms of energy security. And that shouldn't be something which is national. It's in all of our interest to have energy security. It's in all of our interest to make sure that Putin can't weaponise energy across the world, whether it's now or any time in the future. So that's why, you know, there's an element, of course, of each country trying to rise to this challenge themselves, but there is also an element of mutual cooperation in this, in relation to the mutual threats that we are facing. And that's why I'm very keen to develop this idea of Clean Power Alliance, which, as I say, is an inverse OPEC in the sense that the purpose is to drive down those prices across the globe.
When you say active state, you're not talking about nationalizing industry.
No, completely the opposite. So if we do come into government...
what changed your mind? Because I know at some point in the recent past you were for nationalizing
well, we
energy.
Looked at when the energy prices went through the roof in the summer, we had a good hard think about what to, because, you know, consumers, families across the United Kingdom were really worried because their prices were, you know, doubling, tripling, and there was already a cost of living crisis. And we looked at the cost of taking energy companies into public ownership and had to make a decision. Do we use such money as available to pay off the shareholders so that you can have a publicly owned asset which does nothing to drive down bills, or do we drive down bills for people who are struggling to make ends meet? We took the second choice, having looked at those two options. And I think that's the right thing. Having said that, I think an active state, we would create a vehicle, Great British Energy, which would be a vehicle to take advantage of investment in cooperation in renewables as we go forward. So there's a very pragmatic approach to this in the light of a very, very serious cost of living crisis.
Do you feel that the United Kingdom would be in the economic hole that it's in right now had there not been a Brexit? Well, they were still part of Europe.
I think that if you look at the United Kingdom, for 13 years, the Achilles heel has been failure to grow the economy. And so this predated Brexit. Brexit made that even harder, and that's why we've been making the case for a closer economic relationship with the EU. But it's not just the EU. We've not had a strategic plan in the United Kingdom for 10 years. And if you don't have a strategic plan, it's very hard to attract investment. And if you look at the investment, foreign direct investment into the UK, under the last Labour government, it was about 8%. Now it's about 4%. That is driven by the sense of instability and drift that there is at the moment. And, you know, we burnt through 3 prime ministers, 4 chancellors and 4 budgets in the last 12 months. They are not the conditions for stability, and that's why it's very important that we make it clear as an incoming Labour government that stability and economic growth, restoring trust in the institutions that give that credibility and trust, the OBR, the Bank of England, is very, very important to the project of ensuring that in that way we can match public investment with private investment, and in that way unlock the huge potential there is. I mean, the UK's got brilliant universities, brilliant scientists, brilliant innovation. We've got all the attributes for investment. We just need to create the circumstance, the environment in which we can change around what I think is the drift. And that drift is the fact that our Prime Minister is not here, I think, is evidence of the drift. And we intend to reverse that.
Francesco.
I just wanted to underline one thing, that if you noticed, IEA has just published a report which is called Technology Perspective Report. This report is a fascinating reading. It shows what happens not to the energy sector, but to the industrial sector of the world as a result of the transformation of the energy sector. And that is why the IRA is so cleverly crafted, because if you look closely, at this report and you look at the IRA, you see that the US have not only interpreted correctly the need to change the energy systems in a proper way, but also to change the supply chains, the industrial systems we have built in the last 20 years. And the implicit pact that we all made, that is, we want to retain the right to buy what we want, when we want, at the price we want, in the quantity we want, and somebody else takes the burden to invest in the factories, manufacture the stuff, and ship it to us. And that fantastic deal that we made implicitly, obviously, no one ever negotiated a bill, but was taken by China and other Asian countries, which did that. Okay, they did that because we left them the right to do that. And I think it's a great deal to have unless you push it to extremes that are becoming dangerous. So I think it is time to act on that front. It's not just the energy field. Through energy, there is a change in the industrial systems of the world. This change is an incredible opportunity to rebalance these value chains, the supply chains of many industrial goods. That requires attention from the governments, and that requires policies. And these policies, I mean, the IRA is a great policy. Clearly, it cannot be replicated in Europe because we don't have a fiscal union in Europe, as we all know. So we cannot have fiscal levers. We need to have something different. But something needs to be done because this is the future of the economic development. What to do with the value chains and the supply chains of the future industry development, the one that is triggered now, and the one that the IRA is addressing, which is much larger than just the energy sector.
Yeah, Prime Minister.
Yes, I just wanted to get back to Keir Starmer's point about Brexit. By the way, we shelved the idea in the European Union about exits because of successful implementation of Brexit. So it has helped in the EU to stop the debate on exits. But I do agree with Keir Starmer on the role of the state. I'm a free market liberal. But there is a role for the state, particularly in the energy sector, where it comes to regulation. But there is another role for the state, which I would like to draw our attention to, which is how to finance internationally these energy transitions and how to prevent energy poverty. And that has to do with the $100 billion pledge we made collectively, also within the COP system and within the UN. We decided recently to ramp up our contribution from 1.3 billion each year to 1.8 billion in climate financing. I think that's crucial, so that also the Global South and other parts of the world can fully participate. And another issue, and also there the state is important, has to do with water, because there is a water security energy nexus. And I just want to draw your attention to the fact that the Netherlands, together with Tajikistan, is organizing the International Water Conference in the UN at the end of March, where we will discuss water and the role of water not only in having enough and of high enough quality, but also the role it has in the energy transition and in security. So I invite you all to that UN Water Conference at the end of March, also on behalf of Tajikistan. Why Tajikistan? We are a low-lying delta country. Tajikistan is a sort of Switzerland with mountains, etc. So together we cover all the aspects of water.
Prime Minister, do you feel a sense of responsibility for a bit of the mess that Europe has found itself in? Because we're not just talking about the invasion of Ukraine. We're talking about policies that are at times confusing, conflicting, and basically just don't work.
As a general question, that's always true. But I guess you were also alluding to the fact that we have been so long depending on Russian gas. And there has been a lot of criticism lately, and I think that is right to a certain extent. And we could have deleveraged our dependence on Russian gas earlier. And we have seen this year how quickly, how fast this can be done by indeed, for the short term, importing LNG. But what I do find a bit difficult is that we are all banging Angela Merkel and Germany for this fact, because we all in Europe have been benefiting from cheap Russian gas for so many years. All the European countries, not just Germany.
But she does bear some responsibility, no?
Well, she was the one, together with Hollande, and I'm going to defend her here, who after the Crimea invasion was able to come to the Minsk Accord, the Minsk peace process, which was crucial. And Germany is a big economy, but can only do so much together with France in those days. So I think she took the right leadership decisions at that moment. But
What about Gerhard Schroeder?
Yeah, but Gerhard Schröder is 2005, and what he did afterwards.
Stream.
Yeah, okay, but that's an internal German debate. That he was then chair of the Gazprom, whatever, and that's something that his party and he himself have to cope with. But Merkel cannot be held responsible for what Gerhard Schröder did between 1998 and 2005, and this chairmanship of the Gazprom board was from later on. But in terms of the dependence on Russian gas, etc., I do take the point that as a whole of Europe, we were a bit, sitting our chair thinking, okay, that's nice, we have this cheap gas and it's helping us, fueling our economies. We could have done more earlier. But again, this is a collective thing we did wrong. This is not something we can just blame Germany for.
Madam President, I want to bring it back to the fact that Tanzania is on the front lines of climate change, because we're not just talking about erosion, we're talking about flooding, we're talking about drought, and these are all things that are happening to your country in real time. So when the Prime Minister discusses we should have moved more quickly, we should have gone faster, are you encouraged by what you've heard here at Davos in terms of the cohesion between the private sector and the public sector, about the policies? Because frankly, most of the folks that I speak to in the global south feel that they're being left behind.
Yeah, in Tanzania, we know the crisis and we are affected by the climate change. And so we have decided to change our policies. I've been hearing the discussion here. They were talking about the policies, bureaucracies, and all this. So knowing that we have to work with the private sector to mitigate and adopt the effects of climate change, then we have to change ourselves before the climate change changes us. So we have to change our policies, we have to change our governance, we have to change the way we perceive things. And so Tanzania is ready to invite private sector from around the world to come and work with us. We have the resources, and definitely we have the determination to do so.
Ilham, you mentioned a moment ago minerals, rare earth minerals, obviously so many of them concentrated in China. How worrying is it to you as an industry player that we may or may not see another geopolitical crisis in the South China Sea?
Yeah, we talk a lot about energy, but metals and rare earths are equally important, because when we talk about EV battery is what? The generation of batteries we are commercializing and using today, they are called lithium-ion batteries. So you need lithium, cobalt, nickel, and also copper. Copper goes to a lot of our magnets, etc. So Federico said it's China has been localizing and building their value chain for decades, right? 90%, more than 90% of the magnets in the world are being exported from China. It's very difficult to have exports on rare earths. We are one of the few players who can actually separate black mass, but we need the black mass. We need the ingredients, and it comes from China, Australia. Now there are a lot of junior mining, including in the United States of America, in Latin America, in Canada, some of them in Africa. So that diversification and that look at the value chain is important, because, and I was worrying when I saw the Airbus of batteries come into Europe and onshoring the batteries makeup, so assembling batteries. It's okay, you can assemble a battery, but you need to look at the secret source, right? The chemicals, the rare earths, and you need to localize those equally if you do believe that they are essential to your future. So yeah, I think Europe has started, the US definitely is pushing on the rare earth mining. And I think it's critical, and even less than rare. Huh? We don't talk enough about copper and other metals. So we need those diversification, and that's not fall into cheap gas, Russian sole supplier syndrome.
Yeah. Prime Minister, just a quick one for you. You've just been in Washington. We talk about rare earth minerals, but we also, of course, talk about chips.
Yes.
Does it bother you that the White House is trying essentially to tell you what to do when it comes to doing business?
No, and they are not. And that's why it's not bothering me. There is an issue, not just between us and the United States and us and other countries. There is an issue around chips, semicon, when you particularly talk about the high end. So they're very much advanced chips technology, which can be used in defense systems, for example. There is an issue around keeping the industry edge in the Western world, in Europe, in the US, to make sure that we keep that front position, in a sense, in terms of chips production, particularly at the high end. But at the same time, there is an issue around supply chain. Many chips are used in cars, in refrigerators. They are fairly simple. And we should not make decisions which would lead to a situation where that type of chips will not get produced, and therefore the supply chain will get clogged again, as it did at the high point when the economy was doing very well. So all these issues have to be taken into account. We have those debates with a couple of countries to make sure that we take care of our essential security interests. That's not just the US, also others, ourselves and the Netherlands, together with the US, Japan, others, like Germany, France, is one of the big players in this industry. So it is only logical that we have that discussion. But I do feel that we can solve this in a grown-up manner together.
Grown-up politics, not necessarily two ideas that necessarily mix. Okay, Senator Manchin, just before we wrap things up, when you think about what happens next in the United States, I cover OPEC on a regular basis. I was in Vienna when that decision was made to cut production. Today, when we look at the oil market specifically, prices, frankly, seeming to reflect that the Saudis made the right call. In your mind, is this a point where the White House needs to back off Saudi Arabia?
Let me just say, in the whole concept that we've been talking about, energy independence, if you have the ability in your country to be energy independent, you have the resources and the know-how to do it, you should do it. But you should do it in the cleanest fashion possible with responsibility to carbon emissions. That doesn't mean eliminate, that means innovate it, okay? We've done that. That's what this bill challenges you. If you don't have that ability, then you better have a partner that you can trust that will always be there, philosophically, that has the same love of the freedom that you and I have, and basically a democracy. That's who you should be dealing with. We let ourselves get in because of either laziness or the greed, one of the two. We found the cheapest, and we didn't really care what they thought, and if they agreed or lined up with us politically. And we all got ourselves into a mess. We're trying to correct that in the United States. We want to continue to be the superpower and the leader. We can't do it without our European allies and natives. We can't. This is all one big family, and we've got to work together. So I've said the 117th Congress that we just came out of, the most divided Congress in over 240 years of the United States of America, it was the most divided. It was one of the most productive that we've ever seen. Why? Because we knew we had to do something.
Are you trying to suggest that OPEC is holding the U.S. hostage?
Oh, OPEC, we get 8% of our fuel from OPEC. 62% of our heavy crude comes from our dearest trading partner, Canada, Alberta. When all this thing came to a crunch, and I saw my administration, my government, talking about Iran and Venezuela and the Gulf area, I'm thinking, nobody's talked to the North Slope. Nobody's talked to the Permian Base. Nobody's talked to Alberta. That's when I went crazy. That's when I wrote the bill. And that's when my staff, my energy chief and my staff, we started for 3 months. Nobody knew we were doing it because I didn't want to go through what I'd gone through for 8 months when we killed BBB. And I didn't want that type of attention. I says, they might never take this, but again, they might. And it got to the inflection point of where gas prices were going. And basically inflation was at 9% in the United States. Gas prices were at $4, which are unheard of in the United States. And we were in a mess. And the president's poll numbers were here. The Democratic Party, president poll numbers. Everybody was desperate to do something. This was the only thing that made sense, that you could do something. And we didn't know it would have this type of effect this quick. But what happens when you incentivize people, when you say, listen, I'm your partner. We're going to basically share the risk. And we did that, and they jumped from all over the world. And now everyone says, well, that was targeted. It wasn't targeted. We want the UK to be as strong as it can be. It's been our dear partner. All of Europe has been, all of our allies. But do whatever you can, and if it's all about renewables, God bless you, then you should do it. We have both. We can do it all, and we have the resources. Let me tell you the critical minerals.
Senator, I'm
Our
sorry, I'm going to have to
transportation-
cut you off because we only have 4
Our
minutes
transportation mode, very quickly, our
However,
transportation mode, we were moving
I don't
in a
think he knows to
direction.
be cut off. Forgive me, but I have to cut you off. I just want to get our panelists to weigh in just before we let everyone go on what they think is the greatest challenge, frankly, to the energy transition today. Mr. Starmer.
I think the biggest challenge is that whilst we have moved from climate change denial, we've got ourselves into climate change delay. And that's the biggest challenge. And because of Putin, because of everything that happened in 2022, there's a risk that we slide backwards rather than speed forward. I think that's the single biggest challenge, and that's where we need global leadership. And, you know, it's very important that we have events like this here at Davos to have those discussions, to show that leadership. And this is my first time at Davos, and I'm told there's always a mood. Sometimes it's overly positive, sometimes it's overly negative. I think this one appears sort of balanced. We know what the challenges are. There's a negativity about that, but a positivity about where we go from there. And I suppose my sense from it would be, and particularly with an eye on hopefully what might happen in the United Kingdom, is this sense of dare to hope as we go forward.
Prime Minister.
In one sentence, it's getting the volume, the size of renewables at such a pace that we are able to make the transition happen in a balance with nuclear. I think that's possible, but that's my biggest worry, that we can get there. Solar, wind, and all the other alternatives, and nuclear in the mix.
President.
For me, what I can say is whatever way the world takes, insisting that we have to solve this crisis with global efforts. I think everyone has a contribution to make. One who is having technology, the other one is having the resources, the other one might be having something else. So we all have to put our efforts together to solve this energy crisis.
Ilham?
Yeah.
You know, I have spent all my life, my professional life, in energy. And I have to say, energy is something without a purpose. You need energy for something else than energy itself. And I think the lack of understanding of this factor is, I think, the limit of this transition. We discuss a lot about how to generate electricity with this or that technology. That is already chosen by the evolution of technology. That is not a debate we should have. I think the debate we should have is what we're using the energy for, what benefits the energy provides to society, how it should be supplied, how it should be distributed, how it should be used. That's really the demand side of energy is totally absent from the debate. And I think it's really what matters to people. You know, who cares whether you're producing with this or that technology? At the end of the day, this is just a theoretical debate. What is the purpose of all this? Why are we using energy? Why are we lacking it? You know, in the case of many countries here. I think that's really the limit of the transition, the lack of perspective on demand.
Ilham?
To add to all of this, for me, it's about alignment between the different key stakeholders. And I'll take the example of the EU is 27 member states. They all have different energy sources. The North has been blessed with hydro, the South with solar. France believes in nuclear, be it. We are agnostic to that. But we need an energy union with diversified sourcing if Europe wants really to become competitive. So that's alignment, and then a really co-construction with the industry. We need to be in the room, not because we want to be in the room, it's just because that's our job to manage how to do it. You know, if you overregulate and say why, how, and when, you are going to fail. And we should not plan to fail, we should plan to win. And backcasting from the Green Deal and carbon neutrality is extremely important. So that's private, public, alliances and partnership are critical.
Senator?
Thank you. I just want to say thank you to the World Economic Forum. Thanks, Hadley, for having this very informative. And I'm walking away with much more knowledge and much more optimism and much more challenges. But also, I see where success can be, too. But thank you all.
As we hope you all do. Thank you so much for joining us.